And I look forward to saying hello to her, and I've heard that she wants to do that. That would be a great honor.
They're all wanted in connection to a massive bust involving a downtown bail bond company.
3 remain at large, according to the FBI. We have team coverage tonight on this story.
Working with Able Bonds, a Houston-based bail bonds company, investigators say
3 minutes ago, breaking news emerged from rural Virginia that has left federal investigators stunned and the nation reeling. What appeared to be an ordinary chicken farm in the quiet countryside has been exposed as the nerve center of a $1.5 billion cartel operation, one of the largest drug trafficking conspiracies ever uncovered on American soil. FBI and DEA agents descended on the property in a coordinated raid that lasted 6 hours, uncovering 4 kilograms of pure cocaine, sophisticated smuggling tunnels, encrypted communication systems, and enough evidence to dismantle an empire that has operated in the shadows for years. 8 individuals are now in federal custody, facing charges that could result in life sentences. But this story goes far deeper than a simple drug bust. What investigators found beneath the innocent facade of a working farm reveals a chilling truth about how cartels have infiltrated American communities, using legitimate businesses as fronts for operations so sophisticated that even local law enforcement never suspected a thing. The scale of what was discovered today will send shockwaves through every federal agency tasked with protecting our borders and our citizens. Dawn of the operation. 6:47 a.m. Eastern Virginia. The sun had barely broken over the horizon when 3 black SUVs rolled silently down a gravel road, headlights off, engines humming low. Inside those vehicles sat members of the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force and DEA's Special Operations Division. Men and women who had spent 18 months building a case that would culminate in this exact moment. They had one target: Riverside Poultry Farm, a 42-acre property that had operated without incident for 7 years, supplying chicken products to restaurants and grocery stores across the Mid-Atlantic region. But Riverside Poultry Farm was never just a farm. The investigation had begun in April of the previous year when a routine traffic stop in North Carolina resulted in the seizure of 15 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside frozen chicken containers. The packaging bore the label of Riverside Poultry. What seemed like a random bust quickly evolved into something far more sinister when investigators traced the shipment back to Virginia and discovered that similar loads had been moving through interstate commerce for years, hidden in plain sight among legitimate poultry shipments. The farm's owner, 48-year-old Victor Morales, had no prior criminal record. His employees appeared to be hardworking immigrants. The business had proper licenses, clean health inspections, and even a modest online presence advertising fresh, farm-raised chicken. Everything looked legitimate. Everything was a lie. Federal wiretaps revealed conversations in Spanish that referenced product shipments, distributions, and network expansions. Financial forensics uncovered wire transfers totaling millions of dollars flowing through shell companies in Mexico, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. Surveillance teams documented late-night deliveries that didn't match the farm's public business hours. The more investigators dug, the more they realized they weren't dealing with a small-time operation. They were staring at a fully operational cartel distribution hub disguised as American agriculture. By 7 a.m., the perimeter was secured. 30 federal agents in tactical gear positioned themselves at every entrance and exit. Helicopter support hovered 2 miles out, waiting for the signal. A search warrant signed by a federal judge authorized agents to enter the property, seize all contraband, arrest any individuals involved, and dismantle whatever infrastructure they found. The element of surprise was critical. Cartel operations of this magnitude often had contingency plans, encrypted phones designed to self-destruct, emergency escape routes, and protocols for destroying evidence at the first sign of law enforcement. There could be no mistakes. The breach. 7:12 a.m. The raid began. Agents moved with military precision, battering rams breaking through the main farmhouse door as others flooded the chicken processing facility and storage barns. Shouts of "Federal agents! Search warrant!" echoed across the property as workers in the processing plant dropped tools and raised their hands. Some tried to run. They didn't get far. Tactical teams had every exit covered, and within minutes, 8 individuals were face down on the ground, zip-tied and detained. But the real discovery was just beginning. Inside the main farmhouse, agents found what appeared to be a normal residence: living room furniture, a kitchen, bedrooms. Nothing suspicious. But in the basement, hidden behind a false wall disguised as electrical paneling, they uncovered a room that would redefine the entire investigation. Stacks of vacuum-sealed cocaine bricks lined metal shelving units. 4 kilograms in total, each brick stamped with a logo that federal databases immediately identified as belonging to the Sinaloa Cartel, one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. The presence of Sinaloa-branded cocaine confirmed what investigators had suspected. This wasn't a rogue operation. It was a sanctioned cartel enterprise, operating with the full backing and resources of an organization that controls billions of dollars in global narcotics trade. But the cocaine was only the beginning. Adjacent to the drug storage room, agents found a communications hub that looked like something out of a spy thriller. Encrypted satellite phones. Laptop computers running software designed to mask IP addresses and location data. Notebooks filled with coded entries. Numbers, names, dates, and shipment details written in shorthand that would require cryptographers to decode. On one wall hung a large map of the eastern United States, marked with red pins in cities across Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and New York. Each pin represented a distribution point, a network node in a system that spanned hundreds of miles and involved dozens, possibly hundreds, of people. This wasn't just a farm. It was a command center. The underground network. 8:45 a.m. The processing facility revealed even darker secrets. At first glance, the facility appeared to be exactly what it claimed, an industrial chicken processing plant. Conveyor belts, freezers, packaging stations. Employees working shifts to process poultry for commercial sale. But when agents began inspecting the floor layout, something didn't add up. The building's blueprints, filed with the county zoning office, showed a total square footage that didn't match the actual interior dimensions. There was space unaccounted for. A K-9 unit trained to detect narcotics was brought in. The dog immediately alerted near the western wall of the facility, scratching and barking at what appeared to be a solid concrete barrier. Agents used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area and confirmed what the dog already knew. There was a void behind the wall. A hollow space. A hidden room. Sledgehammers and cutting tools went to work. Within 20 minutes they broke through. What they found was a smuggling tunnel. The tunnel stretched approximately 80 feet underground, running from the processing facility to a secondary barn located on the edge of the property. The walls were reinforced with timber supports, the floor paved with concrete, and electric lighting ran the entire length. This wasn't a hastily dug escape route. It was engineered infrastructure, built to last and designed to move product without detection. At the far end of the tunnel, inside the secondary barn, agents discovered wooden crates marked as poultry feed that actually contained cocaine packages, stacked and ready for distribution. The sophistication was staggering. Cartel operations had evolved far beyond the stereotypical image of drugs smuggled across the border in backpacks. This was an industrial-scale enterprise, complete with supply chain logistics, quality control, and distribution networks that rivaled legitimate businesses. And it had been operating in rural Virginia, under the noses of local authorities, for years. The money trail. While tactical teams secured the property and cataloged evidence, forensic accountants began unraveling the financial infrastructure that made this operation possible. What they uncovered was a web of financial manipulation so complex it would take months to fully untangle. Riverside Poultry Farm was owned by a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company was controlled by a trust based in Panama. The trust's beneficiaries were hidden behind layers of shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, Belize, and the British Virgin Islands. Following the money required cooperation from international law enforcement agencies, subpoenas to offshore banks, and financial experts who specialized in tracking cartel laundering schemes. But even preliminary findings were shocking. Bank records showed that Riverside Poultry had processed over $87 million in transactions over the past 5 years. For a small-scale chicken farm, that number was absurd. The farm's actual poultry sales, verified through tax filings and purchase orders, totaled less than $3 million annually. The remaining $82 million was dirty money, laundered through fake invoices, inflated supplier payments, and fraudulent business expenses. The cartel had turned the farm into a washing machine for drug proceeds, funneling cash from street-level cocaine sales back into the financial system disguised as legitimate agriculture revenue. And the numbers kept climbing. Investigators estimated that if this single location processed $87 million, and it was just one node in a network spanning multiple states, the total cartel operation could be worth over $1.5 billion. That figure wasn't sensationalism. It was a conservative estimate based on financial evidence, shipment volumes, and distribution patterns documented through wiretaps and surveillance. This was $1 billion empire hiding inside a chicken farm. The arrest. By 10:30 a.m., 8 individuals were in federal custody, each facing charges that would guarantee decades behind bars. Victor Morales, the farm's owner and public face of the operation, was arrested inside the farmhouse. He said nothing. No protests of innocence. No attempts to explain. He simply stared at agents with the cold, calculated expression of someone who knew exactly what he was involved in and had always known this day might come. Federal prosecutors would later reveal that Morales wasn't just a frontman. He was a trusted lieutenant within the Sinaloa Cartel's U.S. distribution network, handpicked to establish and run the Virginia operation because of his ability to blend in, maintain a low profile, and avoid detection. Alongside Morales, 7 others were detained. 3 facility workers, all Mexican nationals who investigators believed handled the physical movement and packaging of cocaine shipments. Their job was simple: receive product, repackage it inside legitimate chicken containers, and load it onto refrigerated trucks bound for distribution points up and down the East Coast. 2 accountants who managed the farm's financial operations and were responsible for creating the fraudulent invoices and transactions that laundered drug money through the business. These weren't street-level criminals. They were educated professionals who had willingly prostituted their skills to serve a cartel. A logistics coordinator who oversaw the transportation network, communicating with truck drivers, warehouse managers, and distribution contacts to ensure cocaine shipments reached their destinations without law enforcement interdiction. And a security consultant, a former military contractor, who had been hired to design the tunnel system, install encrypted communication equipment, and advise the operation on counter-surveillance techniques. His expertise had kept the farm off law enforcement radar for years, but today that expertise had failed. All 8 individuals were transported to a federal detention facility where they would be held without bail pending trial. The charges against them included drug trafficking conspiracy, money laundering, racketeering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise, the so-called kingpin statute, that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. There would be no plea deals. No leniency. The federal government intended to make an example of this case. The bigger picture. As the raid concluded and evidence was loaded into transport trucks, federal officials began briefing senior leadership at FBI and DEA headquarters in Washington. What had started as a single farm investigation had now exposed a vulnerability that no one wanted to acknowledge. Cartels weren't just operating along the southern border anymore. They had moved inland. They had embedded themselves into American communities. They had built infrastructure that allowed them to function like multinational corporations, complete with supply chains, distribution networks, and customer service. And Riverside Poultry Farm wasn't unique. Intelligence reports indicated that similar operations existed in at least 6 other states. Farms, warehouses, trucking companies, and restaurants, all fronts for cartel activity. The Sinaloa Cartel alone was suspected of controlling dozens of these fronts, each one generating millions in revenue while remaining invisible to local authorities who had no reason to suspect that a chicken farm or a tire shop or a construction company was anything other than what it appeared to be. The implications were terrifying. If cartels could operate with this level of sophistication in Virginia, they could operate anywhere. Small towns, suburban neighborhoods, rural communities where law enforcement resources were stretched thin and federal agencies rarely looked. The drug war wasn't just happening at the border, it was happening in backyards across America, hidden behind the facade of normal, everyday businesses. And the violence that accompanied these operations was escalating. Cartel turf wars had spilled into American cities. Fentanyl overdoses were killing tens of thousands of people every year. Law enforcement officers were being targeted and murdered by cartel operatives who saw them as obstacles to profit. The raid on Riverside Poultry Farm had dealt a significant blow, but it was a single blow in a war that had no end in sight. The community reaction. News of the raid spread quickly through the local community, and the reaction was one of shock, disbelief, and anger. Residents who lived near the farm couldn't believe what they were hearing. Riverside Poultry had been a fixture in the area for years. People bought chicken from them at farmers' markets. The owner seemed like a normal guy, friendly, professional, involved in the community. There were no red flags. No late-night disturbances. No suspicious activity that would have raised alarms. How could a $1.5 billion cartel operation have been functioning right under their noses without anyone noticing? The answer was simple: that's exactly how cartels operate. They don't draw attention. They don't make noise. They blend in. They become part of the community, earning trust and credibility so that when law enforcement eventually does come knocking, neighbors and customers will defend them, insisting there must be some mistake. It's a strategy that has worked for decades and it's only becoming more refined. Local law enforcement officials admitted they had no idea. The county sheriff held a press conference, stating that his department had never received complaints about Riverside Poultry and had no prior interactions with Victor Morales or his employees. State agricultural inspectors had visited the farm multiple times for routine health and safety checks and found nothing out of the ordinary. Everyone had been fooled. But federal authorities weren't interested in assigning blame to local agencies. This was a cartel operation designed to evade detection by any level of law enforcement. It required federal resources, wiretaps, financial forensics, multi-state coordination, to uncover. Local sheriffs and small-town police departments simply didn't have the tools or training to identify something this sophisticated. Still, the revelation left a scar on the community. If a chicken farm could be a cartel front, what else was hiding in plain sight? The legal battle ahead. Federal prosecutors wasted no time building their case. Within 48 hours of the raid, a grand jury had been convened, and indictments were handed down against all 8 arrested individuals. The charges were exhaustive. Conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent to distribute cocaine. Money laundering. Racketeering under the RICO statute. Operating a continuing criminal enterprise. And for Victor Morales specifically, an additional charge of being a principal administrator of a criminal organization, a designation that, if proven, would classify him as a kingpin and subject him to the harshest penalties available under federal law. The evidence against them was overwhelming. 4 kilograms of cocaine. Financial records showing $87 million in suspicious transactions. Encrypted communications detailing shipment schedules and distribution routes. Testimony from cooperating witnesses. Truck drivers and warehouse workers who had been arrested in related operations and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Surveillance footage showing late-night deliveries and clandestine meetings. Even the physical infrastructure, the tunnel, the hidden rooms, the map with distribution points, all of it would be presented in court as proof of a deliberate, organized conspiracy to traffic narcotics on a massive scale. Defense attorneys faced an uphill battle. Their clients had been caught red-handed, and the prosecution had mountains of evidence. The only realistic strategy was to negotiate plea deals, but federal prosecutors made it clear they weren't interested in leniency. The message had to be sent: operate a cartel front on American soil and you will spend the rest of your life in prison. Legal analysts predicted that the trials would take months, possibly years, to fully conclude. But the outcome was never in doubt. Convictions were all but guaranteed. The federal response. In Washington, the raid on Riverside Poultry Farm prompted immediate action at the highest levels of government. The FBI director and DEA administrator held a joint press conference, announcing the formation of a new task force dedicated specifically to identifying and dismantling cartel fronts operating inside the United States. The task force would be staffed with agents from multiple agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE, and IRS, and would have jurisdiction to investigate any business suspected of serving as a cartel front, regardless of location. Additionally, new funding was allocated for financial forensics training, allowing more agents to track and analyze the complex money laundering schemes that cartels use to hide their profits. Congress introduced legislation to close loopholes in offshore banking regulations, making it harder for cartels to use shell companies and foreign trusts to disguise the origins of dirty money. And partnerships were strengthened with international law enforcement agencies in Mexico, Panama, and the Caribbean to improve information sharing and coordination on cross-border investigations. But even with these measures, federal officials acknowledged that the fight was far from over. For every cartel operation shut down, another would spring up somewhere else. The profit margins were too high. The demand for drugs too strong. As long as Americans continued buying cocaine, heroin,